O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on stage, Ellen Kowalczyk.
Hi, I'm Ellen Kowalczyk. I've worked many different places, Microsoft, AWS. I've run my own consulting company, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the things that your future managers would like you to know about security. So the way that this talk was built is I pinged a whole bunch of engineering managers and engineering leaders, most of whom were not in security, to say, when you have people who first start at your company, what are the common mistakes they make? What are the things that you wish they already knew? What are the things you interview for? And basically, I compiled the themes to be able to share it so that you could start with 1 foot forward when you start a new work. Me, I've been in security since 2002. I've been in almost every area of security. One of the interesting things is that I have both been on the security teams, but many times running normal service teams, and therefore having to deal with all the requirements from the centralized security teams. And so I'm very familiar with not only why people from security ask these things, but what it feels like when they come knocking at your door with 5,000 things that they need you to get done. I'm also on the guest review board for Black Hat this year, covering applied security, platform security, I believe, and human factor. So the purpose of the talk, highlighted it at least a little bit, what your engineering managers are going to want you to know, correct some of the misconceptions about security, and this actually includes things that your security people, if they're overeager, may tell you. Give you an idea of what security looks like, from the time you start design all the way through to, when you end of life. And then just some real-world things that you can go do to start working on these skills if you don't already have them. So what is security? So we have this saying about cops and robbers, which is sort of a very common way of saying, like, there's a good guy and a bad guy. Pretty commonly, we see security teams believing that they're the good guy, and they're going to come in and save you or save your customers from you. You are the one they're going to catch doing something bad. It's one of the unfortunate things that happens with a lot of security professionals. In all honesty, if a team that's building a service or a product doesn't care about their customers enough to do security, they probably shouldn't have that job anyway. And I oftentimes have to remind security people of this. But really, it's important to figure out how you can get security to work with you as opposed to working against security. Security is not compliance. And I will say compliance is incredibly important for a lot of companies, especially those who work with finance or government or anything like that. And certainly a lot of the compliance steps do help with security, but compliance is not enough. And in many cases, the things you're doing may not directly apply to the security that your product needs. So it's always good to have more of a holistic view about what security is, as opposed to, its compliance. And it's just another part of quality. My last boss used to joke that it's the itties. We do a lot of these sorts of things, with software. Security is no different. It's just a part of, making a quality service. And so remembering that it's just one of the pieces can help it not seem so foreign or, not difficult to understand, or those weird people or whatever. So security is part of the overall life cycle. This is sort of what we used to do for box product security, where you understand security, make sure you put it into the requirements, into the design, as you implement it, as you verify it, release it, and then we'd have response, which honestly was actually done usually by a separate team. These days, especially if you're working on a service, that is no longer how it works. It very much is that, you plan, you code, you build, you test, you release, you deploy, you operate, you monitor, and it just becomes a circle, or this weaving of all of the things that you actually need to get done to make it work. It's one of the things that for people I saw moving from box products, for example, to services, how do you plan for the fact that this is going to run on servers and they're going to have people physically plugging things into them or taking them out of service and such? There's a whole different set of things you have to worry about in addition to the things you normally have to worry about with code. So one of the other things is that at many companies they say, security is the most important thing. They usually also have at least 5 other things that they say are the most important thing. If you look at, this is from Gartner about what they tell people to look like when they're buying cloud solutions, you'll notice that security is in the 3rd one, and only part of the 3rd one. And so while security is incredibly important, we know from studies that people do not want to pay for an update, for example, that only includes security updates. They want features. And so it's important to remember that you're probably not going to devote all of your time for security. So you really need to think about what are the things that are really going to be meaningful, and what are the things that you're going to decide not to do. All right, so security and design and architecture. Threat modeling. How many of you are familiar with threat modeling? A couple, cool. Just a second. So threat modeling is basically understanding what you have that's valuable, who wants to get it, how they might try to get it, and then how you're going to mitigate that. It's something that you do every day. You know, when you lock your door, you are thinking about what's valuable, the things that are inside. You're thinking about who might want to get it, you know, and that may depend on, you know, your neighborhood or city or things like that. You know, you're thinking about, you know, what are they going to steal? And then you're putting your door lock in as the way that you're going to mitigate it. And you might have a different kind of door lock or a different kind of protection if you have more valuable things versus not. Another common one I actually ask people to do is threat model a convenience store. You know, so you go in and like there's the cash register. There are usually some sort of lottery tickets. You know, there's food. There's, you know, alcohol. All of those sorts of things. If you were the owner, you know, what would people try to steal? What are the things that they could actually, you know, resale or use? You know, who might be an issue? And honestly, it's probably any potential customer. How would they go about doing it? Would they distract you? Would they hide it under their jacket? Like, what are the kinds of ways they might try to steal things? And then what are you going to do? You know, put cameras in place. You know, put one of those things on that like actually beeps if they go through with something. You know, just keep an eye out. To hire a security guard. There are many things that could be done, and basically, it's just that model applied to software. The logistics. For threat modeling, the best thing to do if you're going to do something in depth is a detailed object model. You can do a very light object model if you're still in the design phase, but it really helps because a lot of what you want to look at is things like the connections and relationships of different things and where the assumptions are. So things to look for: over-collecting data that you don't need. You have to protect it if you collect it, and if you can't protect it, you shouldn't collect it. And so really thinking about, like, is this something that I want to make sure that I'm responsible for, that I want to have to report if I lose? If not, do I need it right now, or can I get it later if I need to? You may have areas where you have unneeded risk, where, you know, you're choosing to do something that is maybe a side feature that really no one may use but is incredibly dangerous. It's really good to kind of look at those kinds of things. Connections between components. I worked on the threat model exercise for all of a version of Windows, and the number one issue we saw were connections between things. And then, of course, where do you keep the most valuable things? Ideally, even if somebody gets into your things or breaks it in some way, they can't get at anything useful anyway. And prioritize. So this is basically a summary of what my security team told me in my last role. You'll notice that everything has to be done next week, you know, in 2 weeks and is priority 0. That doesn't actually work. So it's really important as you're threat modeling to say, yeah, I see that's really important. Given our threat model, these are the most important things, and here's how much time we have based on the feature work that we can actually devote. Here's how we're going to go through and do it. Because it's otherwise can become a constant scramble of trying to get everything done, and people are, you know, people are crossing over, or things are getting out of order, and you're only doing partial bits. And then communicate. The number one way to prevent randomization of these kinds of things is to communicate what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, you know, what other things did you consider, why did you make some of your hard choices. Getting all of that out at first prevents you from having every single other person, whether in management or in security or whatever, going, you know, actually, you should really do it this way. You can be like, well, here's the paper where we considered that, and it doesn't work for these other reasons. And so it can really help you with the rehashing, as well as just making it very clear what you're going to do and the risk for the company that may be, so the company can decide how to manage that. So some pitfalls. Assumptions. I assume that somebody else has already bounds checked this piece of user input. I assume that anything that could have ended up in the database must be valid. I assume that no one will ever put a special character into this thing. There are lots of things like that that are really easy, especially if you're working on systems that are kind of down a bit. They're easy to make those assumptions. Notoriously, that is where things break, where everyone assumes that everyone else is going to take care of it, and all of a sudden you have, you know, completely unchecked, potentially, you know, bits of code going through systems that were never meant to handle it because they all assumed that somebody else would take care of it. Of course, the answer to this is to go talk to those other people, and then also think about, shouldn't you check again? So for example, with Zero Trust, it basically says, we're going to check again. We're not going to assume that that other auth system actually worked. And this is done oftentimes when you design things as well. Like, I know I'm getting something from a trusted service, but just in case I'm not, or it didn't get checked, I'm going to do my own checking. Rolling your own. So working in security, at least a couple times a year, someone would be like, so I rolled my own auth. I looked at the other auth solutions that exist in the industry, and I can do it better. I spent a couple weeks doing this thing. I don't have a maintenance plan for it, but like, it'll work. Crypto, we actually had a crypto board, which would check how people were using crypto. The number one reason we used it is somebody come in like, I reinvented crypto. It only took me like a month. Of course it works. I have no background in crypto, but it's just math, right? And the issues we would see where they hadn't handled certain cases or really wasn't as secure as they thought, almost always, unless you are a crypto expert and there's a reason, you don't need to invent your own crypto. There's a lot of crypto out there and a lot of people who can help you figure out how. Security protocols. I know there are all these standards that exist. I know they're commonly used. But I'll just gonna pick this other port and do some stuff, and everything's going to be fine. Again, there are so many things that go on in the real world, that are far more complex as you start getting them out there, that you really need to consider, what is the overall cost of that, and is it really a good idea? In all honesty, even stepping outside of security, anything that is a common standard, a way that things are done, is worth looking at why you would need to do something else. I mean, certainly for research, always good to do something else. But whether it's changing data formats or logging formats, like many of these things break tools you don't even know that exist, or break customers because they don't know how to use the new format. And so it's really important to use your security experts rather than just going and doing all your own stuff. And not understanding common errors. So there are many databases, I'll link to some later, that have what the common vulnerabilities are. This is the, I think it's, OWASP top 25, if I remember correctly. You'll notice that a lot of them have been around for a very, very long time. Basically, it's cross-site scripting, SQL injection, various different ways of handling data and not having enough, room for the data that you're getting. It's important to look at these and say, based on my language, based on my platform, what of these kinds of things are common? The reason that we have this list is because they still happen today. They wouldn't put them up here if people had learned never to do them again. And hackers have definitely figured this out and oftentimes write scanning tools to just go identify these things because, for better or worse, they happen still all the time. I will say that as you go through, you will also see that, especially with languages, that there are languages that have far fewer and languages that have far more. And it's always worth considering, is this the safest language to use for this particular case? I love C and C++. They're very, very good for some really hardcore important things, but they are more dangerous and they do require more checking. And so it's always good to say, should I use a compiled language, or a higher level language instead? Not testing the negative. So it's really easy to test and say that, well, given the correct input, this does the right thing. But what about the incorrect input? Have you tried special signals, different languages, different character sets, way more data than would be expected? All of those kinds of things are important because somebody probably will try it. And with any luck, you only break in an okay way. But somebody once said that a security issue is just a really interesting bug. And certainly, it may have more implications than you would know. Oh, funny side story. I have a friend who changed the first letter of his name from an E to a 3. We knew him as 3 Rick. It broke every single gas station credit card machine that he used. It's something that nobody assumed would ever be in a name, but at least in the US, you can legally put a number in your name. Not planning for post-launch. I've seen a lot of teams that are like, well, it's deployed. SRE will take care of it. It turns out that that actually doesn't generally work. You know the code. You're the one who has to fix the code later. Most of my development teams, at least in the last 5 years or so, have worn their own pagers. And I've also warned my own pager in case they don't answer their own pager. It's not going to be somebody else who magically fixes things later. It will probably be you. So really thinking about, what are you going to do? Have you made sure that you're protecting against some of the things that happen when things go live in big environments? Really helps out as far as making sure that your life later on will be much more comfortable. So post-launch, as I was just speaking of. Sec. So security issues will happen. If you don't have a security issue already, it's either there and nobody has found it, or it will be found pretty soon. This is true for every service and every product I've ever worked on, even at companies like Microsoft and Amazon. Security issues happen. There are many reasons for this, but it's always important to plan. One of the reasons for this is that security is consistently growing. If you would have told me 10 years ago that somebody would figure out how the electrical signals work between different components and how you could use that to be able to decrypt stuff, I would be like, no. If you could use the speculative execution that exists within the chips to be able to actually pull keys and information out, I also would have thought that was completely crazy. But it turns out, at least the second one, the code is like this long. It's remarkably easy to do, and it worked on the cloud, including getting down to other people who are using your same machine. And so incredibly dangerous, something that when we built the cloud, we had no idea could even possibly happen. And there are many more of these. These are just sort of a few of the branded ones. Legacy code. The wonderful thing about many projects, especially coming into academia, is that you get to start from scratch. You hardly ever get to start from scratch when it comes to being in the industry. Almost always you have a piece of code that started 10 plus years ago. People have been adding and changing and adding and changing, and the people who originally wrote that code, it's been through so many transitions that nobody even remembers who they were. And so you always need to be thinking about what are you going to do about the code that you're going to inherit that is now, surprise, it's yours to fix. Especially as a new hire, it is pretty classic to give somebody something and say, this is yours now. We want you to go figure out what needs to get done in order to make sure that it's actually okay. So be prepared. Expect these things are going to happen. Have a plan. Who gets called? How do they get called? How fast do they need to answer? Do they have the correct technology to be able to both answer and deal with things? Do we have a cycle so that people aren't constantly on call? Hopefully nothing happens, but I've been in teams where we had 6+ pages a day, and so we had to have a different system to make sure that we could get a hold of people and actually balance it out. Make sure that there's documentation about what you've built. It's really easy for somebody who just joined the team, didn't work on that part of the feature, to be the person who's called in. And if they can't figure out how it works, they'll have to call you, which means you're never not on call. I've definitely seen this where we had a couple experts where even if they were on vacation, they had to be on call because they didn't document their things, so we had no idea how it worked. And then for the cases that you kind of expect, or at least sort of globally, what's the run book? One of my teams, the run book was so incredibly specific that even people who had not worked on the technology at all could follow the steps and mitigate it, which was wonderful because then we could start accessing overall teams that did 24/7 as or cycled across the world, as opposed to us having to get up in the middle of the night all the time. You'll laugh, but test the plan. It is amazing when you start doing this and you call the person, the decision maker, and they don't answer. And neither does the next one, and you find out that they haven't actually installed the pager app, or they put their pager in a drawer. It's things like, no, actually we updated the architecture and it doesn't work like that anymore. So those things don't work. You do a run book and it fails after 2 steps, and you're like, or there's a missing step. It's really easy to say okay, I would know how to do this thing. But you need to remember that the person you actually want to do this thing is probably not you because you want sleep. Reduce the potential impact. So if you know there are going to be security issues, how do you make it so that what they can get isn't very important? Thinking of the convenience store, this would be the only thing they can grab is a bag of chips. So why would anybody bother? So thinking about where you're storing things. GDPR has helped with this, but there are common patterns where everyone stores a copy of the important data. which makes it a lot easier for somebody to go find it, or it's not properly, authenticated, or there's an assumption that, like, if you can get in the front door, then you should be able to do everything. And so looking at how can you make it so that, like, it's completely pointless will mean that you can react in a way that is much more sort of gentle and planful as opposed to really worrying. Make it slow and expensive. I worked on Xbox fraud and abuse for a period of time. And one of the things we actually diagrammed was how it would go from, like, the people who would steal Xbox accounts, and then they'd sort them based on, like, how many points they had, so how valuable they were. And then they'd go to middlemen who would, like, actually, like, bundle them up, and then they'd go to people who would actually use them to be able to drain all the Xbox points, which they would end up selling on, eBay. Stopping the people at the beginning is nice, but it's hard. There's a ton of them, and it's super cheap for them to keep trying. By the time you got to, like, the point where people had spent money to buy these accounts and they didn't work, now these people are out of money. So it was a net negative. Where you can have something like that, and it costs to do these things rather than you actually, you gain money, people go and move on to a different target. Because fundamentally, if you're after the money, that's a silly way to do it. And don't just consider technical attacks. Tracy's going to cover a really interesting social engineering case later on this afternoon. There's a lot out there that basically says, only stupid people fall for social engineering. I can tell you that is absolutely not the case. One of the problems with social engineering is that our world runs on trust. I assume all of you are supposed to be here. You assume I'm supposed to be speaking. You assumed when I got here that I was me. You haven't ID'd me yet. There are so many of these things that, you sit down and you order a beer. In many places, or a coffee, they let you sit there and you pay at the end. They assume you're not going to go running out. A lot of social engineering works this way as well. I don't read my email headers. I've met a couple people who do, and none of them have been promoted ever because they're busy reading their email headers and not doing any actual work. There's always one. And what it comes down to is you're going to make assumptions. People are going to have to make assumptions about trust. It's the only way things can work. If I'm checking every email, if I'm checking everything all the time, it doesn't work. Scammery is a name that Adam Shostak actually coined, and it basically says is when legitimate organizations mimic a scam. So the email from your IT that basically says, please install this embedded exe. Or at one point, Internet Explorer 6 had the URL www, I think it was bestoftheinternet.com, which was not registered to Microsoft. But it was the actual way that you were supposed to go get the browser. And if you do enough of these patterns, people can't tell when the real ones happen and the fake ones. And so one of the things that can be really hard is you can be like, well, nobody would fall for that. And the person would say, but the last 10 ones have been legit. Training is helpful here, but there are things, especially around scammery, that are impossible to train because there's literally no way a human could tell the difference between real and fake. So one of the reasons you also want to reduce potential impact, and this can be, for example, the impact that any one person can have. I should have the information I need to do my job. I don't need the information that's over there that has nothing to do with me. And if I don't have access, it's really hard for me to lose it. Certainly, there are bouncing attacks, but fundamentally, people are going to get compromised, usually not on purpose, but occasionally. Prepare for that, and so rather than trying to make sure that nobody ever falls for it, be prepared for it to know what you're going to do. So when it happens, because it will, keep calm. Nothing is worse than a team that is panicking. As I keep telling my daughter, panicking doesn't make it faster, it makes it slower. Really step back and think about what's going on. Not for days, but spend the 5 minutes to step back and go, okay, I know you're saying this, but let's step back. What's really going on? Where do we really need to address this? What are the choke points that are actually going to make a difference? Keep a perspective. We know these things happen. We know these things happen all the time. Firefighters get sleep too. But do watch out for your adrenaline junkies. Security definitely attracts adrenaline junkies. These are the people where absolutely everything is an emergency. At one point, one of these people paged me because they found a research paper that had been published 4 years before that had a thing in it. It was definitely not an emergency. Also, they just sent me a link to it, so I had to read all 70 pages before I figured out what they were doing. Look for people who are like so in it that they won't unplug, that they're kind of ramping everything up. These are the people that, for better or worse, can make things a lot worse because they have to keep everything in sort of emergency mode when honestly, most of these things can be handled very straightforwardly. Communicate clearly and often. One of the annoying things when you're dealing with one of these situations is that everyone is pinging you constantly going, how's it going? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? And if you have a set way of saying, we communicate every n minutes, this is where you can find the communications, here's how you ask clarifying questions, you can really cut back on the incredible amount of distraction that everyone asking everything can cause. First thing to do is mitigate. If they're draining a database, can you figure out how to stop that or give them fake data or something else? Like, how do you make sure that things don't get worse? Sometimes you want to do this in a way that cuts off and lets the attacker know. Sometimes you want to do this in a way where you're carefully gathering data about the attacker so that you can go after them later on and figure out what they were doing. And investigate. After you have things reasonably mitigated, so nothing is leaking anymore, figure out what happened. This can be who did this, what techniques did they use, where did they find the holes. This gives you a really good base about basically everything in threat modeling. Who are your attackers? What are you trying to protect from? How are they going to do so? And then use that information to prevent. One of the unfortunate things we often see is people prevent just that one exact thing for that one exact service. The next thing the attacker is going to do is they're going to move to the next service, and the next service, and the next service. So think about it sort of globally. Like, what does this mean as far as how coding practices or engineering practices need to change more globally? So the response cycle. It's very much a cycle. You detect something, you mitigate it, you investigate it, you resolve it, and then you use that to be able to prevent future ones or to build more detections if it's not something you could actually prevent. So your detections get better and better as you find things that you caught partially, for example, with a detection, but not all the way, or you've been able to discover more things that were underneath that you couldn't detect. So security is a partner. So one of the things to know is that security is big, it's always changing, and the thing that security experts really hopefully are doing is they're becoming subject matter experts. So go get help. Never assume that you know exactly how something works unless you have worked on it very recently. I had a case last summer where I was tracking down a potential issue, and I asked 3 people who were very convinced they knew exactly how the system worked, how it worked. None of them were right. They also all contradicted themselves, and it took me forever to figure it out because rather than them pointing me to the people who might have actually really known, they were like, no, I know it works like this. Security people love explaining security issues. You're interested in our area. We love talking about what we do. We love talking about the cool things we've seen break. It's not that hard generally to get a security person to explain something. Plus, you can search for YouTube videos, you can look at books, you can use the blogs. There are lots of interesting ways to get more information about whatever it is that you're dealing with. And as a friend of mine at, I think it's Forrester now, says, when in trouble or in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. Don't just pretend like, okay, I know something's wrong, but I'm not going to tell anybody because I might get in trouble, or I should know, or I think I've got it down. Be loud about it. People don't generally get dinged for having security issues. It's more later on when they weren't actually fixed. Ask questions. Things to look out for when you're dealing with a security team. Everything is always urgent and critical. The entire list of prize zeros that have to be done in 2 weeks. At one point, it was 70 prize zeros that had to be done in 6 months. Absolutely, yeah, completely. It was months and months and months of work, and everything was prize zero. Completely, not something that will actually work. Not everything is urgent. Not everything is critical. Ask questions when like things are confusing or really manual. Like, okay, the way to do this is you have to run the security thing by hand every day. Talked to a company recently who uses AI to try to actually find really good, interesting cases, and then they have individual humans run those same cases every single day, the same way. It's quite a waste of work. It'd be much better to actually go and automate that. It is really easy for people, especially kind of in that emergency mode, to be like, okay, we've come up with a way to like manually deal with it. Next emergency, next emergency. And it's important to go back and say, okay, how do we make that just a part of running our business? Because otherwise, we're going to overload our team. There isn't enough why. Outside of emergencies that you either know you can trust them on or there's enough data there. I still don't know why that research paper was important. There are a lot of these sorts of things where it doesn't apply to you. That was a classic one. We would page a whole bunch of teams, and like half of them were like, well, we don't even have that system. So it's important that rather than assuming that the security people are for sure, like know your stuff and know how it works, go in and be like, why do I need to do that? Is there a better way to do that? And too many people giving you conflicting information. This is a case where everybody knows how the thing is built. Different people are telling you that their requirement is the most important security. Anything like that, where you need to actually pull things together so that your team isn't just constantly getting like conflicting information. Provide feedback. Security has to be a two-way street between security teams and the engineering teams. And in many cases, I see teams that are like, well, it's taken us a month to implement this thing, but that's how they say it has to go. When usually we dig in and like they could have done 5 hours of engineering work on the security side and it wouldn't have taken a month. So talk to your security teams. Tell them what's taking a long time. Tell them what's hard. What's silly. I've seen a lot of security teams really adjust their plans. They just didn't know. It is very, very common that a person on the security team, especially a security engineer, has not worked on an actual shipping product or service and has no experience being part of a team that does anything other than security. And so they just honestly may not know. Learn and grow. Personally, I think security is incredibly interesting. It's a bunch of smart people figuring out what happens when you do the thing that it's not designed to do. There's a lot of resources out there. I love watching, YouTube videos, conference talks, talking to people in security, notoriously cornering people after their talks at security conferences and, asking them for more details or the things they're not allowed to say on stage. There are also a lot of security conferences where attendance is limited and there's no press. They oftentimes have really interesting stuff. I somewhat recently saw a talk where the subject matter was so sensitive that the presenters gave it while wearing full shark costumes. And every single one of their slides was just a picture of a weasel, because they needed to make sure there's absolutely no ability to record what they were doing. It was a very, very interesting case study that they really weren't supposed to talk about, but it really helped a lot of us learn what was going on. Make it fun. Security doesn't have to be annoying and boring. Find the things that you find interesting. If you find people interesting, go, connect with people and such. If you find books, great. Read some books. There are quite a few at this point. If you like watching videos, boy, are there tons. Some of my favorite videos, because I work in social engineering, are various different sort of scams, like the scam where you ask somebody for directions, and while they're thinking about in their mind which way to go, you can grab their wallet and they won't even notice. There are tons of these out there that are incredibly interesting when you see how humans work. And there's the same thing as far as technical talks and all. I found Spectre Meltdown, because I worked on some of the mitigations for it, really, really interesting as far as how it actually worked. Figuring out how you actually kind of do a call to the queue that you're not supposed to have access to with well, do you have a B? Do you have an A? How about a C? And looking at how fast things come back, and therefore knowing what's actually in there. It's something I never even understood would work, and it took me a while, but few people were able to explain it, and I found it incredibly, incredibly interesting. So my summary. Security is going to be a part of your job if you're an engineer. It's part of everyone's job, as are all the other IDIs. Security is weighted against business priorities. It can be prize 0, but not the only thing that we do. Threat modeling is the #1 thing that I see helping people when it comes to security issues. And sometimes that's a really big, deep threat modeling. Sometimes I meet with teams and they get up to the whiteboard and they draw their stuff, and we within an hour, we have a pretty good start to what they need to look at. So it doesn't have to be this, momentous thing that you don't want to start. It can be pretty simple, at least, to get a high level. Learn how to code securely. There's a lot of information about mistakes that get made. There are a lot of tools that will help you find these things, static analysis, things like that. There are IDEs that actually make it easier to use the secure things rather than the non-secure things. There's a lot there if you go and look for it. Plan for issues post-deployment. Even if you don't believe you're on call, if you're the only one who understands it, you're kind of on call. So make sure that you know what will happen if a new type of vulnerability is found or something you didn't catch happens. Plan for those issues. Make sure that you actually test your plan. And ask for help. Good security people are helpful, will actually stop and explain it. If you have somebody who's like, well, it just is, you need a new security person. And here's some of the research that I mentioned. I love sitting on the MITRE site and just reading about vulnerabilities. I realize that probably sounds very weird, but they do a really good job of explaining, especially with code, like here's the code sample, here's exactly what breaks, and here's what it causes, in ways that I just find incredibly intriguing. I spent part of yesterday doing that, actually. So that's it for me. I'm notoriously quick and try not to speak too fast, but I usually do, so I'm actually ready for questions.
Okay, who has any questions for Ellen? No questions. Okay, so let's thank
I'll be
Ellen.
around too if you don't want to answer, ask something like right up here. So.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yep.
Let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you very much.
O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A diferença. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude.
So we're awarding a pair of JBL headphones, and the winner is Tomás Alagoa. Tomás Alagoa. Ok, obrigado a todos.
O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on stage Alexandre Gazet.
So, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I will share with you my experience as an offensive engineer in Airbus evaluation team. So, just to introduce myself quickly, back in 2007, I was in the same position as you, obtaining my master's degree in computer sciences. And since then, I've been working in the cybersecurity fields, mostly on the offensive side. So something like a bit more than 10 years of experience now, and I've been messing around with debuggers and disassemblers for more than 20 years. Right now, my current position is I'm a member of the evaluation team at Airbus, and that's the experience I will try to share with you. My daily activities usually involve lots of reverse engineering, red teaming, firmware analysis, platform security, and this kind of stuff, mostly on the offensive side. So, this is what we try to share all together. So, the experience in the evaluation team and some real use case of evaluations that we have performed. Airbus' core business is to design and manufacture airborne products. That means aircraft, helicopters, satellites, for both civil and military usage. So we are not exactly the usual tech or IT startup. At the heart of the company, you will not find data centers, but you will find what we call final assembly lines, which are huge factories where all the pieces of the aircraft, for example, are put all together to produce the final products. There are many of them, some in Toulouse, France, where I'm located, some in Germany, in the US, China, and more recently, Canada as well. It goes without saying that to feed this final assembly line, this huge factory, you need a big supply chain with parts coming from hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers. And in everything, if goes well, at the exit of the final assembly lines, you will find some beautiful flying turtles like this one. It is one of the three S380s that have been produced for manufacture for a Japanese company named ANA. So there's a blue one, the orange one, and there's a third one, which is a green with the green paintings. So quite inspiring products. These are the products that are built and manufactured by my company. If you look at the figures on the right of the slides, these are the indicators that are usually expected from our customers. So we have range of the aircraft, seat capacities, fuel consumption, fuel efficiency, maintenance time, all these kind of things. So at this point, you may be wondering what is an evaluation team doing cybersecurity doing in such an industrial company. If we look at this infography, this cybersecurity outlook, actually there are many engagement points where we can go and use as a playground. Of course, there are the aircraft or the products themselves. There's more and more connectivity within the aircraft. It may be satellite communication, for example, to provide Wi-Fi, in-cabin Wi-Fi, communication with the ground, air-ground links, many of them, or the infrastructure of the ground also. Also all the manufacturing on ground, all the factories, and all the maintenance tools and sites. These are all the potential missions where we can go and intervene. So now I will try to present you what the evaluation team is doing inside the company. Our main mission is to evaluate the security of the company and its products by reproducing the behavior of a skilled and motivated attackers. Basically, it's some kind of red teaming on the products. These are our main mission, and I will come back on the term deep dive just after. Our other mission involve red teaming, more classical, what you would expect. We play attackers on the network. We play the sparring partner of the blue side, of the blue team, trying to reinforce and test the detection capabilities of the CERT and SOC team. We also develop our own tools. We do some purple teams, and also some expert appraisal when needed. What is very important is that our trigger is always the business. We are here to protect the business. That's what we do. So when a sensitive, when something is identified as business critical, it is a case of intervention for us. Or when there is a need for independent assessment in case of certification of embedded equipment, for example. When an evaluation is decided, is planned, the inputs usually are some security objectives that will be challenged during the evaluation, alongside with an attacker model. What is the attacker model we consider for this specific target or systems? The outputs of an evaluation are quite diverse, actually. Of course, it can be technical vulnerabilities. Something that I will stress to me is that vulnerabilities is not the end of the story. It's just a symptom of something else going wrong in the process. We will try to uncover fully workable attack paths, the same one that a real attacker could use. And of course, when identified, we will try to break them. We'll provide full security status report on the product or system we evaluate, as well as some recommendations, of course. All of these participate to input for risk reassessment and certification in case of embedded systems into aircraft or helicopters. The scope of our engagements, like you saw on the ecosystems, are quite range. We have been working on aircraft, of course, embedded systems providing GPS capabilities, satellite communication, SATCOM, both on aircraft and helicopters. We've been working on satellite communication and other services. We also work on OT, on some ICS equipment, ICS firewall. A couple of months ago, we were working with some of my teammates on the physical access control system, you know, the badges that you use to access restricted areas, for example, smart tools, CCTV cameras. On the more classical IT stuff, we've been working on video conference system, so thing you find in most meeting rooms to share some slides, for example. We've been working on Windows Master, some IT administration tool, like HP ILO features, I will come back on this a bit later, but also mobile applications and printers. What I've called the deep dive singularity, what differentiates this mission from other kind of engagements, is the rationale behind it is that if a system is critical, we will invest the time that is needed. And it can mean a lot of time. This is really what is unusual. For example, our typical engagement time is usually 2 to 5 evaluators for a period of time between 1 month to 6 months. So that's quite a lot of time, and it is very unusual in this kind of industry. Usually it involves lots of experience because we are going from between very different topics, like we saw just before. Like I said, we aim to uncover fully workable attack paths. It usually involves either black box, gray box, or white box evaluation. Most of the time, still, it's mostly black box evaluation, and we do lots of reverse engineering during our engagements. We are working with very specific systems, avionics systems, embedded systems, and sometimes the tooling is not directly available off the shelf. So we have to develop our own tools. Some examples of tools we have developed are Gustav, which is specific tools that allow us to test for the robustness of partitioning operating system. Partitioning operating systems are quite regularly used in embedded systems to separate different domains. And BinCat also, which is a static analyzer that you can integrate with your usual disassemblers. We have the opportunity and we are granted the right to publish all these tools in open source, so that's quite a good thing for us. We have published many other tools, like BTA, for example, that is a tool allowing to perform some analysis on Active Directory, and plenty of other tools. We regularly find vulnerabilities during our engagements. So we have been trying to build a state-of-the-art security posture regarding that. We always report the vulnerabilities we discover to the vendors, because it helps to get them fixed and to raise our security level at the end. When working on the IT domain, we follow what is now well-accepted 90 days disclosure policies. Now it is widely accepted by most of the vendors, and sometimes it is a necessary incentive to have the vendors first publish a fix and security bulletins and CV associated with the vulnerabilities that are reported. We have also our own front end, if some people want to report some vulnerabilities into our own systems. Something that's very important and a key factor about our teams, we are something like 10 persons. And something very important I will stress is the diversity of background and technical profiles. That's really a must. There's a lot of knowledge sharing within the team, and that's very important. Beyond that, all of us share some kind of the same state of mind, what I've called this offensive thinking. I will come back later on this. And we all share this appetite for discovering and learning new things. We try to be also actors of the global security community, publishing at various conferences, like I'm here today, participating also in a conference committee, publishing our tools when we can, and also doing some training in universities and things like that. So now I will give you a concrete example of what a deep dive evaluation means to us. Servers are the building block of all the IT infrastructure. It goes without saying that when you have hundreds of servers, you don't want to come and physically plug into each of them to perform the administration of the servers. So for that, all the vendors are providing some remote administration features. It's called Baseboard Management Controller, or BMC. In case of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise HPE servers, this feature is called ILO, HPE ILO. So why do we started to investigate to make a deep dive evaluation of these products? At world level, HPE servers is, depending on the year, something 20 to 25% of global market share. Within Airbus, we have hundreds of these servers. So for us, it is business critical. We cannot afford to lose them. So that's why we started to do this evaluation. And because also, regularly, during some other kind of engagements, like pen test or red teaming, we found this ILO BMC are sometimes exposed on the internal LAN. Just for those who don't know yet, this remote administration feature usually expose some kind of web server when you can connect and you have access to a page where you can check the status of the servers, monitor temperature, health of the disk, health of the operating system, host operating systems, and plenty of things. So it's very powerful. If you own this, you own all the server. At hardware level, the BMC is a fully independent chip embedded on the motherboard of the system. It also has its own memory, its own network card. So it's really a machine within the machine. What is also a bit effraying that many of these systems, if you scan internet, are exposed directly on the internet. Quite often you will find them exposed on internal LAN of companies, corporate LAN, and quite often they are not well monitored, not well enough. So our methodology, when we did this deep dive evaluation of the systems, it was a pure black box study. There was very few public knowledge about this system, so we had to start from the ground. So we get back the firmware update from the vendor itself, and we started to learn the format, to dissect all of this. We had to extract all the firmware components, meaning the bootloader, kernel, userland image, etc. After that, we started to analyze the operating system that was used. It was a real-time operating system, quite classical in embedded systems world. It's named Integrity from US companies. We also performed a full analysis of the boot chain to understand what was the root of trust, how the signature was verified at each step of the boot, etc. Then we had enough knowledge to start rebuild the memory space of the ILO firmware to start where the various modules were mapped, how, etc., what are the features. And then we started the analysis of the various exposed services like SSH, web server, IPME endpoints, etc. Quite quickly, we uncovered a very classical, typical vulnerabilities from the 90s, I will say. Using a sensitive and safe function like scanf on the HTTP header, connection HTTP header. The same in decompiled source code. So on the bottom of the slide, you see the scanf where the vulnerability resides. And using very well-known classical exploitation method, we're able to perform buffer overflow on the connection fields and to overwrite another variable that will tell if the user is authenticated or not. Meaning that with a simple HTTP header, we're able to take control, full control of the servers. If you can reach the server, you can own it. We did not stop here. We just didn't want to find a single vulnerability. We wanted to have a full understanding of the systems and the risks that are associated with its usage. So we continue to dig from there. From there, we had an authentication bypass. We turn it into remote code execution. We're able to execute our own code of the system. And from there, looking also at some hardware schematics from the vendor itself, we're able to discover that from the ILO systems, you are able to fully access the host memory, the memory of the host operating systems. So basically, it turns a remote administration feature into a gateway to the host operating systems. We've also been working on the newer version, ILO 5, which was the last one released, and they introduced something they called Silicon Root of Trust, basically a secure boot with the hardware encore. And we are also able to find a bypass within this secure boot. So what it means for us, it is really a significant investment in time. We spent something like all combined 4 months for 3 evaluators, with Geoffrey Xarny and Fabien Perigot, who left the group since. So almost 1 full year of work for 1 person. And it was a pure black box study. But overall, the takeaway for we really believe that the takeaway for the group are really positive. We gain an extensive knowledge of a technology that is widely used and deployed within other group, and an extensive knowledge of it and the risks that are associated with it. We discovered 4 vulnerabilities, critical vulnerabilities, one of them with one of the highest CVE score, 9.8 on a scale of 10, a bypass of a secure boot. But that's not the main things. Of course, all the vulnerabilities were reported to the vendor. The vendor published security fixes, security built-in, and using that, we're able to, of course, patch our systems. We are also able to raise the risk awareness within the group, and for ourselves, but also our suppliers and our customers. At the end, we had really a better and deeper understanding of our IT infrastructure. And we've been able to publish these results at various conferences, and then other researchers have continued this work, finding new vulnerabilities, for example, in the SSH components. So overall, the results are really positive for the group. Another kind of another engagement that we did recently was on the Xerox multifunction printer. Once you will join a company, you will find this kind of device everywhere. They are used daily by thousands of employees to potentially handle confidential data. And sometimes these devices are connected to the network, so they can be reached from everywhere. During this evaluation, the goal was we tried to exfiltrate confidential data without any credentials on the device, on the printer. We started, again, full black box study. We get the firmware update from the vendor side, started to extract it, decrypt it, and reverse engineering it. And this study was 40 days, 40% days. Again, many vulnerabilities were found, including some backdoor accounts used by the vendor to perform remote administration, some remote command execution vulnerabilities that would lead to full compromise, again, of the device, some passwords stored in clear text, on the device itself. We reported all our findings to the vendor as well. Some of the vulnerabilities are already fixed with security built-in published. Some are still in the process of being analyzed and fixed. We have been able to influence Xerox to publish this CV and security built-in. And my colleague Raphael Rigaud will present more deeply all these works at Infiltrate conference in April, I think April. Yeah. So in a couple of weeks. So regarding the deep dive evaluation framework, we really believe that the outcomes are largely positive for the group. Of course, it is a huge investment, but the outcomes are positive. We invest time when it is needed when the system is considered critical for the business, with concrete impacts both internally and externally. And I really believe in the efficiency of a seasoned technical offensive team. And I will get back on these notions of offensive thinking. You may put different words on it, maybe creativity or something, but I'll try to provide some kind of personal thoughts and feedbacks about how the team operates and what kind of state of mind it takes to be efficient in this kind of job. The first one I will talk about is curiosity. It may be the main driver that we all share during our job. We always want to answer these simple questions: how does it work? What's the logic behind that? And to give you another example, I will tell you a personal anecdote that happens to me in 2010, I think. I was working in another company. I had a professional laptop, set up a BIOS system password, and a couple of months or many months later, totally forgot about it. So basically, I was screwed up. Quickly, I discovered that some people were releasing on the internet keygen that you could use to generate the supervisor password from just from the system tag of the laptop. So I really wanted to know how they did that. So I started to reverse engineering the BIOS myself to understand what happens behind the curtain. So I started to grab some information from the BIOS modders community. This community usually involves people who want to unlock some features, or at that time to play with Windows license schemes where some information were stored inside the BIOS. So we started to unpack the update, BIOS update, start reverse engineering code, and at some point I was kind of stuck because some code that I find in the keygen was not present within the BIOS. So it should be elsewhere. And I discovered that the BIOS vendor would actually hide some code, not in the BIOS, but in another totally different computational unit, which is called the keyboard controller. It is a different chip that is located on the motherboard of all your laptop. It is usually a low energy, low consumption processor, because it is always running even when your laptop is in sleep. And what I discovered at that time was that the BIOS vendor would hide some code inside this keyboard controller, and the BIOS will simply communicate with the keyboard controller to verify the master password that you input. Starting from there, I needed to understand the hardware, to find what was the hardware architecture. I had no clue about it. After some research, I discovered that it used ARC Compact, which is quite unusual for this kind of stuff at that time. I had to write my own disassembler for it because nothing was directly available. I discovered that some insecure update process was used, and I was able to push my own modified firmware on the keyboard controller on this small chip. So from there, I wonder, what can we do? So my thought was, we can try to pivot and attack the main processor from the keyboard controller. And from there, I started again to analyze some components of the BIOS update. And one was the SMM code. SMM is one of the most privileged modes you can run on the main CPU. And I quickly discovered that there was some communication between the keyboard controller and the system SMM handler. And using a vulnerability I discovered, I was able to compromise the SMM handler to inject my own code, and providing thus a super stealth backdoor that you could hide within the keyboard controller firmware. The takeaway from all that is that all that time, curiosity was the main driver. It was a side project of me for many months, and it led to totally unexpected results. At the beginning of this study, my only goal was only to understand how we can generate the system password for the BIOS, but it goes much, much further. And in that process, I learned so much about BIOS themselves, so their builds, architecture, etc., about keyboard controller, hardware architecture, SMM, platform security, plenty of things. So one advice could be, don't stop to break things, try to repair them, build things also, that's very important, not to only break, but also build some things, experiment, and repeat all again and again. Another state of mind that we all share in the team is the willingness to learn. As you can see, on the scope and various engagements we did, we quite often we go from totally different topics to another. Avionics systems, IT systems, CCTVs. So we need to quickly grab lot of information, assimilate them, and be able to be efficient into the new evaluation. And for you, as young engineers, it may be a challenge, because right now, the pace at which the technology evolves is quite fast. Things evolve quite quickly. 10, 15, or maybe 20 years ago, one of the challenges was to access valuable information. Or how can I get proper information about the specific domain I want to study? Now, you are kind of, and I am also kind of overwhelmed by the volume of information that is accessible to me and to you. Today, if you want to be efficient or to master, for example, static analysis, reverse engineering, exploitation, browser exploitation, hardware stuff, you will need cryptography, you will need many lives to do so, and it will may not be enough. So you have still kind of, I think, pick your battles. And now there's more and more specializations. If you want to be very, if you want to go very, very deep into one subject, you need to spend lots of time inside. And one advice I will say is try to build a robust understanding of a domain or a subject and not to switch too often. If you spend your time only scratching the surface of a topic or a domain, at the end, it will not, it's my personal opinion, it doesn't work very well. Another advice is simply to team up. That's what I really appreciate within my team, with the diversity of profiles. You really get a boost in efficiency when you are able to work with people with different backgrounds. You learn quite much faster, and it's a really huge benefit to working in this cross-disciplinary team. It can be within the team or with external people, exactly like a scientific laboratory will do, trying to mount collaboration with researchers from all over the world. So teaming up may be a good solution to this challenge. Finally, and that will resonate with what Ellen said just before, try to always keep the mind and the willingness to challenge the assumptions and model. That's very important. Try to always expect the unexpected. What errors could have been made? Challenge what are the assumptions that are made by the designers of a systems. Attack the boundaries, attack the edge case. Detect if there's a drift between the specs and the implementations. All these kind of small things that we do naturally, that's very important. Just to illustrate this, in school, usually when I was in school, computer architecture, you have one processor with its associated memory resource. Is this model really enough to address the issue of platform security? Not at all. And that's what we try to do with my friend Alex Matrosov, we published at Black Hat this summer. Now, if you want to seriously think the platform security problem, you have to take into consideration actually many independent computational units that are all defining their own security boundaries. Of course, at the center of it, you have your main processor with, in this case, the BIOS firmware, U5 firmware, but around it, you have plenty of other computational units, like the embedded controller, like the GPU, network card, BMC if we're on a server, TPM firmware, hard drive, or SSD firmware. All of these are running their own code, defining their own security boundaries, possibly with their own secure or not update process. So the system is quite much more complex than what it was thought initially. And also some very practical problems. Many firmwares from various vendors, and possibly some of these vendors are receiving this firmware as binary blob and has no word on it. And what's important, the firmware security is not the sum of all the independent parts. It's much more complex. And in our study, we've again used the KBC to, we discovered that it was used by, for example, some security features from Intel named BIOS Guard. We provided an analysis of it. And we also discovered a weak update process on this KBC for some Lenovo laptops. And for example, another example, like Ellen said about the CPU, the processor. 10 years ago, the processor was a black box, and basically it was considered as reliable, trustable. Nobody looked at it. Nobody, except for a couple of individuals who still tried to scratch and to dig into it, and at some point they discovered that there was possibilities to sample the internal state of this processor. And now, since maybe 2 or 3 years, we have seen plenty of techniques to leak some information, to influence the behavior, spec meltdown being the most well-known. So, keep this challenging in mind. And to conclude my talks, I will say that as an organization, I really believe in the efficiency of small team with a huge diversity of profile. It's really what I consider the most efficient way of working. The deep dive evaluation models that we deploy, I believe, have largely positive outcomes for our group. Once we identified business critical asset, we invest the time that is needed. We perform and we're able to raise risk awareness significantly. And doing so, we reduce our exposure. That's very important. As young engineers, like you are, in cyber or not, by the way, try to be curious and keep learning every time. It may be a challenge, but still you need to do that. Try to develop some robust understanding of the technology you manipulate, you use, or you're involved with. Switching too often may be not beneficial at all. And try to keep this challenging mind. Try to challenge everything new, everything that is considered as a supposition by others. And just to conclude with what I started with, industry needs your skills, so come challenge us with new and refreshing ideas. There's plenty of things to do. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer to your questions.
So, who has questions? Okay, so let's thank again. Yeah. So we're going to award the prize now. It's a Netflix card for 25 euros.
Marco Coelho. Marco Coelho? Não? Vai um, vão dois, vai outro. João Vieira, parabéns.
O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude. O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on stage, Tracie Martin.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sticking with me till the bitter end of today. Welcome to my talk, The Spy Who Liked Me. Most of you in this audience are probably way too young to remember this particular movie, but hopefully you know who that is. It's James Bond. There's a new one now. I hear he's very cool. So we're going to talk about how we groom and recruit assets for foreign intelligence services using social media. There's a very big delay. There we go. Okay. Content warning. For those of you who are sensitive, there are large themes of terrorism, large themes of violence in this particular talk. If you're uncomfortable with those things, if those things are upsetting to you, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you need to walk away. I completely understand. As a veteran myself of the US military, I completely understand how those things can be upsetting. All right, so a little bit about me. My name's Tracie. I decided to join the Air Force when I was 19 for reasons I still don't fully understand, but that happened. And then when I got out, it turns out that I was very well suited to doing military work. So I went to protect our nation's missile defense program. So for those of you who aren't familiar, that's the big things that go up in the sky and shoot other things out of the sky. That's what I did for a long time. And then after that, I got accepted to go to NATO here in Europe, up in Belgium. And I was working as the information security manager for NATO counterintelligence. Once I decided that the government was really cool, but I was terribly underpaid, I decided to go to private, and I ended up getting a job at Microsoft doing incident response. I moved from there to Google, Adobe, and then now I run an organization called DefendCon, which is targeted towards getting more women and non-binary individuals into technical cybersecurity roles. So that's a really long way of saying I've done a lot of really weird stuff in my career, but I'm going to talk to you about one of them. So this is the quote that I like to use to start all my talks. Bruce Shiner, he's a technologist, a security person who's been in our industry for a really long time, really well known, super solid guy. And he says, amateurs hack systems, but professionals hack people. So what does that really mean? That doesn't mean that our colleagues in the red team, our colleagues in the blue team that do these really cool esoteric hacks are any less professional. It means that humans as a species are fairly lazy. We have evolved to do low friction activities for high reward gains. That means that the best thing I can do with my time is not to spend 4 months researching a specific exploit for a specific server in a specific country or in a specific company. It's really to see if I can get other people to do my work for me. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So this talk, we speak about OSINT, or Open Sources Intelligence. We talk about human intelligence. And we also talk about foreign intelligence services. And in this particular context, I'm using foreign in the sense of foreign to the United States, which I understand is a very US-centric space to be in, but I promise there's a tie-in. I promise. Stick with me to the end. I promise it's relevant. All right, so I'm not going to talk a lot about tools. There are a lot of really good tools talks that you can see on YouTube, that you can see Layer 8 conferences coming up. Social Engineering Village at DEF CON has a lot of great stuff. I do use them, but this is not that talk. So for those of you who are expecting to see a lot of super cool technical code dropping, this is not your talk. I'm going to talk more about how we do it and the methodology we do it and where this comes from. My disclaimers, my warnings. I'm not a spy. Now or ever, have I ever been a spy? And someone at this point in the audience usually points out, but Tracy, that's exactly what a spy would say. You understand my conundrum. So what does this mean and why do I say it? It means that I was never a badged or credentialed agent. So I worked for counterintelligence. I did not work in counterintelligence. Why is this important? Because if I had worked in counterintelligence, I could not give this talk. Because then that information would not be my own independent research that I used to get here. So which leads me to my next point. Everything you hear today is my opinion. This is how I would target people. This is how I've observed different nation-state attacks going on in the news. They are not the viewpoints of my employer, past, present, or future, the US government, any of the agencies I've mentioned probably don't really even want me speaking on this. So they're just me. So let's get some definitions. Open sources intelligence. What that means is I don't need to be working at the NSA, the CIA, Interpol, whatever, to get access to it. Generally, we use this to speak about things I can find on the internet nowadays, but in reality, it's often things I can find in a library, in municipal records. There's a lot of ways you can get open sources intelligence that are off the grid, so to speak. When I talk about human, I'm talking about what we would traditionally consider spy work, human intelligence. That's me approaching you to figure out how you work so I can get something out of it. Coincidentally, social engineering is the same thing, but it's morphed into a way of doing this in the IT world and in the hacking world, largely to use deception to get something that I want out of a target or an asset. So OSINT in InfoSec is usually used as part of a red team exercise. It helps me map a network. So if I am going to go attack Airbus, I'm going to want to know what their network looks like, what their technology stack looks like, and I can do that by basically Google dorking through the internet, just kind of doing some soft probing, because servers, when I ask them what they are usually very kind enough to tell me, especially if they're web-facing. So that helps me figure out what technology stack they're using and how I can actually target them. It helps me improve the odds of social engineering exercises. That means if I know that you are a huge Manchester United fan, by the way, I know nothing about football, so I picked that out of thin air. Sorry to anyone who's not a Manchester United fan. I can come up to you and strike up a conversation and say, hey, that was a great game last night, huh? Man, that goalie, really, he did a good job. And you can say, that's right, Manchester United forever. And now we have a bond, and now we're friends because we have a common framework to engage. And that means that now that you start to see me as one of you, you're going to be more willing to do things for me. Because as humans, we are tribal by nature. We seek out connection, we crave it, we need it in order to survive in the world, so we are constantly looking for those indicators that you are the same as me, or you are different than me. You are either in my tribe, or you are an outsider to my tribe. So when I speak about OSINT, I'm specifically talking about this last one, which is I want to gather information on people with the intention of exploiting it. If you have information that I want you to give it to me. And I want you to be glad to give it to me. All right, so the origins of this talk. While I was stationed at NATO, there was a shooting at Frankfurt Airport. It was part of a troop movement. By the way, this is the content warning I gave you earlier. This is as bad as it gets, though, so if you can stick through this slide, it's going to improve. Basically, we had an incident where an individual went into a troop movement bus, shot a bunch of airmen, many of them died, and it really caused sort of a big stir, especially in the overseas military community, because it was the first time, I think, that we felt like we couldn't be safe where we were stationed in Europe, because Europe has always been largely friendly to us since the Second World War. So I started really thinking about this. So how did this happen? Well, it turns out that we take these Bluebird buses that are manufactured predominantly in America. They stick out everywhere. We parked them in the same spot in the same airport every time we went to go get a troop movement. And so somebody sat and they watched the airport and they realized, oh, troop movements come every, Tuesday, Thursday at 6 p.m. and that's where it's going to be. So I'd like you to believe that that's really why I started to do this line of research, but the honest answer is it was a little bit spite-based. So we had a Facebook group at my old base that the network operations chief ran in his free time. And it was where families and soldiers and airmen could connect to get information and resources. Well, professionally, being a security person and him being an IT person, we often clashed on things because I would tell him he had to do something, and then he would tell me I didn't have to do something. Words were said, feelings were hurt. He kicked me out of his Facebook group. I didn't really love that so much. So I thought, aha, I bet I can still get in that Facebook group. And so I created an account that made me an Army colonel overnight. Fantastic. Asked for admission into the group, got approved. And then suddenly I started thinking, yikes, there's a lot of stuff we talk about in here that we assume to be in this boundary of trust that there's not really a high barrier to entry for. So then that got me thinking, well, if I was an attacker and I wanted information that maybe I didn't necessarily have access to, this would be a pretty good place to start. So, now that we're talking about people, we need to talk about assets. And when I talk about assets, I'm specifically talking in the sense of an intelligence asset. And they're broken down into 3 categories. So you have your basic agents. Basically, these are the people who have primary access. It's the person working in the nuclear bunker that has the nuclear codes. It's the person who is working on a missile system that has, the information to do the launch. Things like that. Those people are very rare, right? Because there's only so many people that have access to that. And they're specifically trained to resist manipulation by foreign intelligence. So that doesn't really work for me. Then we have executive agents, and these are the ones you see in movies, and they're shooting people and blowing up buildings, and quite frankly, that's a lot more drama than I really want, so I don't really mess with that. And the third category, though, is super interesting. Access agents, people who have access to the people who have access. Now, these people are really interesting. They know a lot. They're not trained in protecting information. They're often not trained in how to avoid being approached by foreign intelligence services. And because of the nature of how they work, they're often much easier to manipulate. So now I know who I want to target in a broad category. But what makes a really good asset? The CIA has this framework, which has since been updated, but I particularly like the old one because I'm just old school like that. They call it MICE. Money. Do you need money? Are you going through financial struggle? Are you perhaps in debt? Are you making risky business moves? Ideology. Maybe you're no longer so much in love with the United States and what we're doing. Maybe you don't love our current political system. Maybe you're not a fan of our president. It happens. I should probably target you then, because I bet I could change some of your touch points into how you live your life. Coercion. Is there something about you that you hope nobody ever finds out? This is very culturally and contextually dependent. I live in Seattle, we're a very progressive city. If somebody were to find out that, say, I had a sexual orientation that was different than heteronormative, not so much of a big deal to me. If I live in a country where that is ruthlessly oppressed, that's a big deal to me, right? That's a huge deal to me. That could lose me my life. That's a point of coercion. The final one is ego or excitement. Basically, are you that person that thrives on adrenaline? Do you want to feel important? Like, yeah, man, I really got that. I know so much. And you will always find these people, by the way, if you go to security conferences, they're the ones at the bar on their 7th whiskey. It's like, well, let me tell you about the time Google got hacked because of my code. They're fun. They're a lot of fun in this category. And usually, especially, and I hate to say this, especially if you go, really? I don't know anything about Google. Could you tell me? Okay. So, now we have to talk about the intelligence funnel. What am I after? Well, I want something important. In this particular case, I wanted to know if I could find out troop movements. I wanted to see if I could find out where troops were moving in and out of the country. So now I need to figure out who has access to that information, predominantly soldiers and sailors. So, okay, but I know they're going to be kind of tricky. So I'm going to go after maybe their spouses or friends. Now I need to figure out from that big group of people who might be actually able to be exploited. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to learn everything I can about these people. I'm going to deep dive. I'm going to know them better than they know themselves. So I'm going to create detailed documents on who they are and what they do. Then I can start my approach. This is the risky part, right? So in the old days, it used to be that I would send someone to a bar that you frequented and say, hey, nice watch. I also have a nice watch. Do you also like watches? I too like watches. How about you give me your information? And they would either go, okay, or they would go, oh my gosh, run, find the police. That's where it gets risky. But now, I get to be on social media. And if you say, oh my gosh, run, call the police, I go, delete account, make a new one. Delete account, make a new one. And forever, I can just be in this constant approach. And eventually, the law of large numbers says, eventually, I'm going to find somebody who's susceptible to this. So the final one is I want to exfiltrate the data, right? Once I've found the target that's easily manipulated, who's willing to work with me, I want to get all the information they can give me and then peace out before they find out what I'm actually doing. So, for those of you who don't know, dossiers are basically the files that intelligence services or journalists keep on people of interest. Typically, it keeps your vitals, your name, your place of birth, your weight, your eye color, anything that would be in a police report if they were trying to find you. It also talks about your family associations, mother, father, sister, brother, cousins. Do you have any of those that are a potential weak spot for you? Do you have perhaps a teenage child who's been in and out of rehab that you're trying to keep under wraps? Do you have a mother who's in financial debt that you're constantly giving money to? These are things I want to know because not only are you vulnerable, but your entire network makes you more vulnerable. Your business connections, are you doing business with certain countries, certain governments, certain companies? Do you drink with the head of Airbus? I don't know. That would be interesting information to me. Other associations, church friends, these are like your social clubs, right? Maybe you go to a certain church, that helps me get more information about you. Maybe your kids go to a certain school, you support the PTA. All of this is designed so that I have a broad basis for becoming your friend. By the way, no one ever wants to talk to me after these talks, after I give this. It's fine, I swear I'm not the bad guy. But that's what a bad guy would say. All right, so now, I figured out kind of what I want to do, and so I grabbed this because I live in the state of Washington, and I think, well, if I'm going to hit something in Washington, I want it to be a very large military base. Why do I target military people? Military people have access to a lot of information, even at a very low level. When I was 19 years old, I was in the Air Force, I had root control access for every server that controlled everything in the entire United Kingdom for the Air Force at 19. Terrifying. No one should have given me that kind of control. No one. No one should still give me that kind of control. Terrible life choices. So, the other thing that's really interesting about the military is that because we're constantly changing. When I was 19, I left home and I moved to a foreign country and I didn't know anybody. And then 2 years later, I moved to another foreign country and I didn't know anybody and I didn't speak the language. And then 2 years later, I moved to a completely different place. And I was constantly changing over and saying, I don't know anyone here. So you know what that does? It makes me want to find people because we're biologically wired to seek connection. That gives me an opportunity. So I figured out where I want to hit. Now I can do some basic Google reconnaissance. I mean, this is nothing terribly fancy, but I can figure out where their groups are, that their operations are. If you're even slightly familiar with military, you can kind of figure out what these people do for a living if you look at their groups. So for example, the Special Forces group. Those are the people we put behind, outside of the wire doing really gnarly stuff with bad guys. Those are people that are doing some really, really sensitive stuff. Maybe I want to look there. So now I know kind of where I want to look. What if I went to LinkedIn? By the way, I chopped all of the information out of this guy's profile because I felt so bad for using it. Maybe I want to, go look and see what they've done. Well, this is nice. He gives me his entire work history and what he's worked on. So I know this guy's a signal guy, which means he's a comms guy, which means he probably has access to all of the tech that runs the military. That's interesting. I like that. So now I kind of know what I want. I've done some information. But where could I find a publicly indexable search engine that has all this information on people that they freely give me to play with? Facebook. Now I know nobody uses Facebook but old people, and that's fine, I'm an old people. But you'd be surprised at how many people are still on the platform. There's a lot of things that happen only on Facebook that don't happen on other platforms. But the good news is when I first started doing these talks, you could just go to anybody's page and it was all public. And then I did a lot of training, and I like to believe this was me, but it wasn't. It was just the industry moved on. And now everything, you have to be their friend. And that bums me out, because that makes me work harder. And as we've already discussed, I'm lazy. So, that's not so good. But thankfully, there's these things called Facebook communities. And I bet you if you go home tonight and you look at your neighborhood or your school or your church group, you will find a community that is related to that. It just so happens that in the military, there are lots of them. So many. And the bar to entry, not so high. But it turns out, if you say, hey, I'm a supervillain and I'm trying to exploit your people, would you let me join your Facebook group? They oftentimes say no. Just kind of one of those things. It's okay, though. Everyone say hi to Karen. Karen's a lovely young lady. I don't know her. I found her on the internet. She is stationed at Fort Benning. She put these lovely photographs up. The reason I have covered her face is because I'm not actually using these photos with permission. So she put these up as her photographer came and photographed her husband's coming home. And I was able to use that to make this lovely profile page of her. These are her actual vacation photos, by the way, which I found after finding her actual Facebook profile. This looks pretty freaking convincing, right? I'm not sure that Karen herself would know that this isn't her page, except maybe she doesn't have a dog. I was trying to go for something innocuous. So now that I have my sock puppet, or fake account, I can start really looking into the information in these groups. So I joined a bunch of groups. And I just started searching for keywords. So here we go. This person's husband's moving. He's in Iraq. So she's lonely, most likely. She's probably without a support system. We know that he's not there, so, she has a toddler. This is great. They live in a one-bedroom apartment. I mean, this is information that I would like. Or, we have somebody that's coming home from deployment soon. We talk about our deployment in Afghanistan and when her husband's returning. Oh, maybe her husband's leaving for deployment next week. Fantastic. I bet somebody else is going with him. I bet someone else's are going with him. There's just so much information in these groups, it's actually a little hard to process. So you really have to figure out what it is you're looking for. For me particularly, when I'm doing these types of assessments, I'm looking for troop movements, I'm looking for people who are in specific units, specific battalions that have access to specific information. So I'll tailor my searches for that. But more importantly, I want to find people that are actually susceptible to manipulation. So here's this young lady. She said, well, her husband works for the 2nd Infantry Stryker Brigade, and she wants to know when and where they deploy. And this very, very, very helpful person down here says, oh, they go to North Fort, Yakima, NTC, JRTC, and every other year they go to Thailand. Great, now I know where your unit is moving. I can plan for that. But moreover, I really, really, really want want to see if you're going to be susceptible. And this is the part where I sound like a huge jerk, but again, not the bad guy. She says she's suffering from depression. Depression, mental illness, all of these are trigger points for manipulation, or can be, especially if you're not seeking help, which especially in military communities, mental health is very largely discouraged from actually seeking treatment. You can lose your job. I myself have suffered from depression since I was a little kid, and I was told specifically in the military that I was not allowed to seek treatment because I would be kicked out, and I watched it happen. And so people in this community are very, very, hesitant to talk about this, but they'll put it in a public Facebook group. I mean, technically it's private, but as you've seen, not really super private. So, okay, now this starts getting so I have to tell you guys, when I'm doing this research, it's kind of like when you're in high school and you start hearing the really good gossip, and you're like, oh, I don't even know these people. But it's like, oh my gosh, why would you post this publicly? Stop. So she's going through a divorce, potential that the kid's not his, so they're gonna do a paternity test. That seems like a pretty good inflection point for me. Then there's this one, divorce, same thing. She's all alone for Thanksgiving. I bet she's pretty interested in making new friends. Sounds like I'm hosting me a Thanksgiving dinner. So for those of you who don't know, Basic Allowance for Housing, or BAH, is a government entitlement that you get when you're married. If you are not married, or if you are living apart, this is technically fraud. She's admitting to defrauding the US government on a Facebook group. I bet that's some pretty interesting information to know. All right, so now I need to make friends. So the cool thing, or not so cool thing, about these groups is that in them, because people are desperately trying to find connection, you'll find these posts of, I just moved here, I don't know anyone, can anyone, reach out to me, hang out, I just want to know someone here. And it's a very basic and normal human reaction that unfortunately can be exploited to make friends with people who may not have your best interest at heart. And then the interesting thing is, a lot of times in these groups, they'll post all the new members. So even if they're not posting asking for friends, I now know they're new here, and they're probably looking for friends. All right, so some things to consider. When I do these types of campaigns, I usually have a sock puppet account, which is my main fake account. I also have another sock puppet account that's a friend of my fake account, because it turns out people don't like to make friends with people who don't have friends. It's weird. So I have a fake friend for my fake person to make real friends. It's a lot of work. Now, when I send these, I only send about 15 this time, because quite honestly, my primary account got burned about a week before I did this talk, and I had to kind of step it up and create a fake one. So I got 15 out, about 30% accepted, which is pretty normal. It goes up exponentially over time. And the reason it does that is because as you create more content, as you get more friends, as you accept more friends, people tend to believe you more. I am much more willing to accept a Facebook request from somebody who has 6 mutual connections than no mutual connections. And if you're in the same Facebook group, odds are somebody in that group knows somebody in that group who's also a mutual connection. The interesting thing about this is then the more you do this, the more friend requests you send in a short amount of time. And as I said, I was very pressed to do this because I was trying to get content ready. I went too far. I went too fast. And so I started getting messages like these. I'm sorry, I don't know you. Who are you? No one. I'm just going to fade into the background. I was never here. So she unfriended me. Her cousin unfriended me. And then like 2 people that she knew unfriended me. It was terrible. That's kind of one of the things you do. You can go and have a really good account, but it takes time. You can have kind of an account if you want to go really fast. When you have these sock puppet accounts, it's very important to make them seem real. And what do I mean by that? Join groups, especially local groups. I like Tacoma. Tacoma happens to be nearish to one of the bases. I like soccer. I like AC/DC. Whatever it is, this makes you seem like a more well-rounded person. You have to start posting actual content, commenting on other people's. This is an investment of time. The people that I know that do this full-time as their job, they spend an inordinate amount of time maintaining their 20 to 30 sock puppet accounts. I was actually talking to a gentleman who does this full-time, and he said he spent between 20 and 30 hours every week just sort of feeding his sock puppets, just making sure they looked real enough not to get flagged. what I like to do is I have a bunch of like inspirational posts because it turns out that all of us post the same crap to Facebook. Whatever you do in life, know that the people who have your back love you. Hashtag same. It's, right, like this makes you real because everyone has posted that exact same quote 100 times. And they're easy. I don't have to come up with like actual original content. I can just, you know, say really cliche things and people think that I'm just really cliche, which I actually really am. I also really need to be methodical in how I build these accounts, and I build them for specific purposes. They have their own persona and their own backstory. Karen, for example, is a military spouse. I did that specifically because I was targeting military spouses. If I was targeting active duty members, I would have a specific account that was a military, like my colonel, a guy that got burned, unfortunately. People respond to that because I had my official Air Force photo with my official Air Force uniform and my official flag in the background. I mean, that's legit. How can you argue with that? It's right there. All right. So now this is where things start to get a little murky. Turns out there's a very fine line between reconnaissance and active solicitation. Reconnaissance is I'm just sort of passively obtaining this information. I'm stalking Facebook groups, and I'm sort of looking at people and gathering information. Maybe I'm doing Google Dorks. Maybe I'm stalking them across other platforms. But then there comes this point, if I were a foreign information service, that I would cross, where now I'm going to start reaching out to you. Now I'm going to start sending you a friend request. I'm going to start sending you messages. I'm going to start talking to the people in your lives. And that's where you kind of cross some really unfortunate boundaries. That becomes solicitation, and in many countries, that starts to fall afoul of their espionage laws. Because if I were to friend request Ellen, when she worked at Microsoft, we both used to work at Microsoft, and said, hey, could you give me the source code for Windows 10, because we're cool, right? And she said, sure. Well, now I've just committed corporate espionage, even if it was just under the guise of research. Now I have an ethical duty to tell Microsoft, hey, you might want to watch that one. So that's why if you're going to do this, and I recommend that you don't, this is my warning for everyone, don't ask for information you don't want to have. Don't ask for information you could be legally barred from obtaining. I'm not a lawyer nor a spy, but I will tell you that you definitely do not want people in suits coming to visit you and asking you why you're doing this line of research. So, some real-world examples. The universe was kind to me as I came here, and they left me this gift. So it turns out a bunch of Hamas operatives were using fake women to get Israeli members of the IDF to install this chat app that looks very similar to WhatsApp, that then went on to install spyware in their phones that was recording constantly and taking pictures and doing who knows what. These are things that are actually happening. This is not something that I make up just because I have weird hobbies, right? These are things that people are actually doing. They targeted them using social media. They targeted them using specific information about them that was publicly available. And there's a bunch of these, and these literally took me maybe 30 seconds to find. These are just sort of the three most prominent ones that I'm aware of. The one I couldn't find the actual article. There was a woman who targeted a bunch of military contractors on LinkedIn. And she was able to get base plans for like aircraft carriers. I mean, it was truly shocking how much people were willing to give her based on LinkedIn, based on messages that they'd been sharing. So this is something that really does happen to people. But right about now, you're thinking, I don't work in the military, I don't have access to nukes, I don't have access to aircraft carriers, and nobody cares, Tracy. Nobody cares about this. This is not relevant to me. Funny you should mention that. So apparently at this university, you folks do a lot of research. Interesting. I wonder if anything you're doing is useful and interesting, potentially dangerous. I wonder if any of you are researching cryptography, science, health, and epidemic outbreaks. I wonder if any of you are working on trusted computing systems. I bet you are. I bet you have information that I could use. So yes, this absolutely applies to more people than you would think, and even if it doesn't apply to you personally, I will bet it applies to someone you know. Now that you're sitting here, I want you to think through all of your family contacts and your friends and your cousins. I'm a little bit odd because I've been in tech now for a really long time, and I seem to know everyone at every company now. I don't know, it's like a weird thing. Once you get to a certain age, you just eventually know everybody at every company, except Airbus, so I'm gonna find Alexandre after this. I haven't actually met anybody from Airbus yet, but I know lots of people at Boeing. So when you think through that, think about what information they might have. Maybe your mother works at, a telco company here in Portugal. Maybe she has access to some of their core infrastructure. Maybe your father works for, Portuguese National Defense. Maybe your cousin is at a university that's doing research into hazmat containment and virus outbreaks. There's a lot of things that people forget because it starts to seem so normal. It seems normal to me that I've worked at most of the top 100 companies in tech. It just seems normal to me. And I grew up definitely where that was not normal. But the more you're exposed to it, the more normal it becomes. So, what does this mean for you? Now you're all bummed out. Now you guys are gonna go home and delete all your social media profiles and never talk to anyone again. And that's not the message of this talk. These are necessary things and necessary platforms, and the desire to connect is neither wrong nor should it be avoided. We as humans need these connections to survive. It is a fundamental part of our biology. But just like fire is a fundamental part of how we consumed cooked foods, we should be a little careful with it. So, anyone in this room can be an access agent. Anyone could be approached for even the most silly reasons. Those with access to technology, medicine, infrastructure, data source, anything. Maybe you just have the code to unlock the door where the research is held. Maybe you don't even do the research. So with that, I really want you to start thinking about, to Ellen's point, your threat model. What do I know? What do I have access to that other people might be interested in? And how can I protect against that? All right. Understand how all of your pieces fit together, not just you, your family, your friends, your connections, your university affiliation, your job, your church, whatever it is. Think about how all of those things fit together to make you who you are and threat model accordingly. Think about your mice. Are you going through anything that could be potentially used against you? If somebody approaches you and says, hey, I have this get-rich-quick scheme, I bet you'd be interested, and it's a little close to home, maybe wonder if that's the best thing for you. Talk to your family, and I usually give this talk to information security professionals, and the reason I put this in there is it turns out that information security professionals are really good at talking at people and less good at talking to people. So we all sit around in our bars late at night and go, man, users are the worst. Turns out we never actually talk to those users. Ellen's laughing because she's heard me say this. So go home and talk to your family. If you've learned something today, go home and talk to your mom, to your dad, to your kids. Say, hey, be careful what you're sharing on social media because it can increase your exposure. Be wary of unknown friends. I'm not saying don't accept them, but maybe there's some really great articles on how to spot a disinformation account. It's a whole separate talk, but educate yourself. Figure out what those accounts look like and what they might be trying to get from you. Treat anything, and I say Facebook groups on here, I know we always say this, treat everything communicated over the internet as public. Yes, that includes those apps that supposedly delete themselves. You know which ones I'm talking about. Nothing is deleted, everything is forever. Just be mindful of that. And if you choose to share that, great. That means I trust that you've done an adequate threat model and you understand your exposure. All right. Here's your first OSINT challenge. You ready? No one's ready. No one's ready. No, really? You've learned nothing from this talk. You're not excited about OSINT at all. I'll go home, it's fine. All right, so you can find me on social media. I'm on many social media platforms. I purposely did not include it here. You're welcome to connect with me. Facebook, I don't accept friend requests for obvious reasons, but on any of the other social media platforms, you're welcome to connect with me. And for anyone who connects with me and leaves a comment, I'm giving away the Humble Bundle book set that just came out from No Starch Press, which actually has the threat modeling book that Ellen referenced and a really great social engineering book, as well as a couple of other goodies if you're looking to jumpstart your cybersecurity education. This is a really good way to go. All right, I think that is it. Does anyone have questions? No one. All right.
Okay, we're going to pick the winner now. Just wait a bit so that we get the laptop up.
A atitude marca a diferença. Nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão. O teu crescimento, a nossa partilha. O teu futuro, a nossa visão. Qual é a tua atitude? Na Everest, o futuro é teu. Traz a tua atitude.
And the winner is João Vieira. Please come on up. Thanks, guys. That's it for today. We hope to see you tomorrow. And we have workshops in a minute. Thank you.
O nosso maior ativo são as pessoas. A atitude marca a diferença. O teu ritmo, a nossa harmonia. O teu talento, a nossa paixão.